In today's lesson, we'll be looking at water issues. Now, water is necessary for all life on Earth, and even though most of the planet is covered by the stuff, only a small percentage is accessible for human use. It is for this reason, among many others, that we must protect this resource and deal with the issues that threaten it. And in this lesson, we'll be looking at the following key ideas. We'll begin by looking at some basic facts about water on Earth. Then we will look at how water is used and abused in Canada. And finally, we'll be looking at some case studies to get a better sense of how water issues affect us globally today. Now, Earth is known as the blue planet. It's the only planet in the solar system that's covered by water. That's not to say that Earth is the only place in the solar system that has water, but it's the only place where life exists that we know of in the universe. And the amount of water on Earth is key to that. It covers nearly 3/4 of the Earth's surface. We don't know how Earth got its water. We're not 100% sure. We're pretty sure it's some combination of comet and asteroid strikes early in the Earth's history. But all of the water that's on the Earth today, we know has been around for over 4 billion years, for most of the 4.6 billion year history that the Earth has had. And this is because we have a water cycle on Earth that cycles water. Once water is used, it goes back into the environment. It's evaporated, it gets rained back down, it ends up back in the oceans. All the water that's on Earth today has been around for a long, long time. And once you think about this, I mean, the water you're drinking out of a cup today might be water that a dinosaur drank millions of years ago, or that the first life evolved out of billions of years ago. It's the same water that's always been around. However, water is not evenly distributed throughout the planet, and it's not all accessible to humans. So this graph here is showing the distribution of water on Earth, and as you can see, the vast majority of water is not accessible for humans. About 97% of Earth's water is in the oceans, and of that water, we can't use it. We can't use salt water for human use, for human consumption, for irrigating crops, for any human purposes. There are desalination techniques that we could use in order to desalinate water, and then we could drink it, but at this point that's not a cost-effective and energy-effective solution. So we're kind of stuck with the fresh water that we have on Earth. So that's about 3% of the Earth's water, but of that, the vast majority of it is still not accessible to humans. About 2/3 of it is trapped in glaciers and ice sheets, and about 30% of it is groundwater trapped underneath the Earth. So only 1% of that 2.5% is actual surface water. And then of that, most of it is ground ice and permafrost. Only a small percentage is actually accessible. It's less than 1% of the Earth's water that's actually accessible for human consumption. So this just goes to prove why we need to protect the resources that we do have. And in Canada, we use a lot of water. So this map here is showing per capita usage of water. And you'll see countries in North America, Canada and the US, as well as Mexico, places like Australia use a lot of water per capita. But unlike other maps that we may have seen in the past, there's not a direct correlation between water usage and levels of development. You'll see many European countries use a moderate amount of water, especially compared to a place like Canada. So it's not necessarily that using more water is an indicator that your country is more developed. So how do we use water in Canada? Well, on average, the average Canadian uses between 250 and 300 liters of water per day for municipal uses. So these are things like flushing the toilet, taking a shower, washing the dishes, etc. But if we were to take into consideration all the water that goes into producing the things that we use in our daily lives, so thinking about manufacturing and agriculture and industry, the number jumps to over 4,000 liters a day. Now, luckily in Canada, we don't have to worry about things like water shortages on a daily basis. We go to turn on the taps and we're confident that there's always going to be water coming out of there, unless there's some kind of problem with our plumbing. We're not worried that there's not going to be enough water in the system. And that's because Canada has an abundance of water resources. Little over 7% of Canada's surface is covered by lakes and rivers. So we have all this fresh water, and we are a rich country that has the infrastructure to treat that water and then to use that water. So we're lucky. Not every country, though, has those same resources. And there are many issues around the world that are associated with water that we as global citizens have to consider in order to ensure the future sustainability of this resource on Earth. Now, one important issue is overfishing. Now, fish are a renewable resource, but only if sustainably managed. And this has been a problem for many years. Fish are not evenly distributed throughout the oceans, at least the ones that we use in our fishing industries. Most fishing industries are concentrated near the shorelines on continental shelves, where it's easier to have access to fish in those shallower waters. So we've been focusing a lot of our attention on these areas just off the coast. And as a result, we've been overfishing in those areas. And the world fish catch has been in decline for many decades as a result. And there have been collapses in entire populations and entire fisheries as a result of this. So one very famous example in Canada was the cod fisheries collapse in Newfoundland in the early 1990s. So this graph here is showing the way in which the cod fisheries collapsed. And you can see here from the mid-1800s up until the 1970s, there was a gradual increase in the amount of fish that were caught every year, and a particular spike following World War II. This is when things like sonar technology and better boats and fishing technologies and fishing techniques came into fashion. So they were able to catch many more fish on average. So along with other destructive fishing practices, things like bottom trawling, which also kills other parts of the ecosystem, we started to see fewer and fewer fish caught every year until in 1992 when the fisheries just completely collapsed. And the cod fisheries off the coast of Newfoundland, which were once vital to Newfoundland's economy, have not recovered since. There are still very few cod in that area. So this just goes to show that abusing these resources can lead to permanent damage. Now, some scientists believe that wild fish populations they may start to recover in the coming decades if we continue to use more sustainable methods. So things like using fish farms to get fish, as opposed to only relying on wild stocks, and more sustainable fishing techniques, getting away from those bottom trawlers, which again destroy ecosystems. Another issue we have to consider is the issue of pollution. Now, oceans have suffered from dumping of pollution by large ships for many years. People used to think that if you dump stuff into the ocean was so big that it would dilute it, and it wasn't that big of a deal. You could dump chemicals from your ship into the ocean, and the ocean was so big that it would have no impact. It would become diluted before it would ever be a problem. This has been slowly disproven in the scientific community. So there are more regulations today to make sure that ships don't do that. But there are also unintentional consequences of industry that lead to pollution. So things like oil spills and agricultural runoff. On land, water is also highly used for things such as industrial applications, for agriculture, for sewage treatment, all of which can add to the pollution of drinkable water. And one particular pollution issue, which is becoming a greater and greater issue by the day and can literally only get bigger until we find a solution to it, is the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Now, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch is essentially an island of garbage in the North Pacific that's twice the size of France. Now, it's not a solid mass. If you were to sail out there, you couldn't stand on it. You couldn't walk around on it. This is mostly like degraded plastic, little tiny pieces of plastic. But they've all pooled in this area of the Pacific Ocean, and it's essentially a giant patch of garbage, a giant landfill with all the plastic runoff from ships and from land that have been taken out there by ocean currents. And this is a problem which, again, we've only known about for a couple of decades, and we still don't have a great grasp on how to deal with this problem. It was discovered in 1997 by a California environmentalist named Charles Moore, and this has incredible impacts on the environment. So you have birds and fish that are washing up dead with stomachs full of plastic, and again, these are small pieces of plastic. It's not necessarily like, you have a turtle that's eating an entire water bottle. These are little tiny pieces of plastic which get out into the ocean and degrade over time. And as animals are, living and eating other animals and eating smaller animals, it gets into their systems and it builds up as it goes up the food chain. There are also other things which cause this pollution besides just large pieces of plastic. So things like plastic microbeads, which are found in cosmetics, and synthetic fibers that we find in clothes. Now, there are solutions being worked on to try to mitigate the damage done by the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. So in Canada, the Canadian government has said it's going to ban those plastic microbeads in cosmetics by 2018, and there have been other solutions proposed for those synthetic fibers which get into the water system. So one solution is as simple as adding a filter onto your washing machine that filters out those fibers, kind of similar to the lint filters we have on our dryers. A solution that simple might be able to prevent all this plastic from getting into the ocean. But there's still the problem of litter getting into streams, and then from there getting into lakes, getting into the ocean, and being taken out there by ocean currents, as well as the garbage being dumped by ships that we have to deal with. Now, why is all this garbage pooling in the Pacific Ocean? It forms because of ocean currents that take plastic from the shores out to sea. And although there is one that we know of in the Pacific Ocean, which was the first one found and the biggest one, we've since discovered that where these gyres form in the ocean, these ocean currents, where they cycle around, we found these all over the world. We found these in the South Pacific, in the North and South Atlantic, as well as in the Indian Ocean. They have their own little garbage patches as well. So this is a problem which is growing, and again, it can literally only get bigger until we find a solution. And it's hard to find a solution. Again, this is out in international waters, so it's hard to get countries to take the lead and take the initiative to get started on this. And it's hard to get countries to cooperate on this because the cleanup is going to be very expensive. And in addition to all of this, this would be a lot easier to solve if it was just a giant island of garbage and plastic in the Pacific Ocean. At least we would be able to see it and we could pick it up and we could do something with it. Because this is kind of just a plastic soup of degraded plastic hanging out in the ocean, it's hard for scientists to study. It's hard for us to clean up. So this is a problem which we don't have a great handle on, and again, until we have a solution, it can literally only get worse. Another water issue to consider is flooding. So water has an amazing ability to destroy. Floods can be caused by natural forces, things like heavy rainfalls, rapid melting of snow, but it's also caused by human processes too, things like urbanization, straightening of rivers, and deforestation, which can lead to flooding, as well as the increasing intensity of storms as a result of climate change. On the other hand, we have water loss, which can be a problem in different parts of the world. Now, one of the most famous examples of water loss due to human effects is the Aral Sea in Central Asia, which used to be the largest inland lake in the world, but has shrunk from a height of 68,000 kilometers squared in 1960 to only 3,500 kilometers squared in 2005. And as a result, its salinity has gone down, and the plants and animals which used to live there and fund industry in the area have not been commercially viable. This map here is showing where the Aral Sea is in Central Asia. And again, this was once important to the economy of these countries, places in the former Soviet Union, modern-day Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan. This was important to their economies, but now that it's shrunk, it's a lot. There's less of a it has a less of an impact on their economy. And this map here is showing the extent of that damage. So on the left side here, we have a satellite image from the 60s showing the lake at its height. And then on the right side, how the water loss has caused it to shrink today. And in fact, this is actually now two different lakes. There's a North Aral Sea and a South Aral Sea. They're not even connected anymore. Now, why is there water loss in the Aral Sea? This is caused by water diversion programs in the former USSR that were used to irrigate land, farmlands in the desert regions here in the Central Asian area. But as a result of this, there was this sea lost its water source. and over time started to dry up. Now, work has been done to try to repair the damage done to the North Aral Sea, and parts are starting to see a comeback, but the South Aral Sea has largely been left to shrink. And here is a timeline of what that's looked like in pictures. Again, from its height in 1960, you can see it's gradually shrunk over time as that water was diverted away to those irrigation projects. And over time, we just kind of have a lake that's a shell of its former self. Another issue to do with water is the problem of bottled water. So bottled water, again, is a popular consumer product. It's one of the fastest growing. But there have been many campaigns against it because of its environmental impact, and particularly of plastic bottles. Again, bottled water can take the form of municipal water sources that are bottled by companies, or it can be spring water from ground sources. The major environmental concern here are things like this plastic water bottles where, again, not all of them end up being recycled. And this is one of the things which is leading to that Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Also the fact that the plastic we have to do something with, a lot of it ends up in landfills and it doesn't biodegrade for thousands of years on its own. So this has a huge environmental impact. And this is despite the fact that in the developed world, most of these places have drinking water. We have clean drinking water that we can use, but we'd rather buy this consumer product. And in Canada, tap water is generally safe, unless there's some kind of disaster in a community. From coast to coast, we have clean drinking water in all our communities that's properly treated. And here we can see what the procedure is in different cities across Canada. And you'll see there's a range in treatment processes. Some are better than others. But even in these places where you're only getting primary treatment of water, the water is still safe to drink. You're not going to get sick from drinking their tap water. And yet, because of the marketing of bottled water, some people don't think that tap water is as clean. It's just as safe to drink, if not more safe, because it's more heavily regulated. There are no regulations on bottled water, whereas we know exactly what's going into our tap water and how it's treated. Now, running water and water treatment was one of the technological triumphs of the Industrial Revolution. It was almost free water for all. You could run your tap and get thousands of liters of water for barely any money. And yet people are willing to go to the store and buy bottled water for the same amount. They could get thousands of liters for it. And when we look at areas of the world that don't have this infrastructure, bottled water is a threat to them ever developing that. You'll see bottled water companies which have attempted to expand into these countries and market their product in these countries where they don't have safe drinking water. And on the surface, this might seem like a good thing, a nice economic free market solution to these countries not having clean drinking water. But what this does is it takes the pressure off of governments providing safe drinking water to their citizens. There's no pressure on them anymore to develop that infrastructure and to build treatment plants because they can just sell their citizens bottled water. Another issue is the issue of water scarcity. Now, water scarcity is the inability to provide water for the needs of a region. And the UN estimates that 2.8 billion people spend at least 1 month per year without enough water, and more than 1.2 billion completely lack access to clean drinking water. Now, water scarcity can be either economic or physical. Economic water scarcity is that you can't afford to get access to water. There's water available, but you can't afford the infrastructure to buy it. You can't afford to build a well to get access to that water. You can't afford to have access to technologies that help you clean the drinking water. Physical water scarcity is that there just physically is not water in your region. There's a drought and you can't get to the water in time. You live in a desert. Those would be examples of physical water scarcity. Now, while physical water scarcity is often a geographic feature, it can be made far worse by human activities like climate change. So you can see here on this map, it's showing the differences in countries based on water scarcity. And there, again, whereas in other maps we've looked at in the past, you'll see a clear link that versus developed versus developing countries. Not so the case here. This is more based on geographic features. in places where there's deserts. So if we're looking in the Sahara Desert in Africa, if we're looking in the Middle East, if we're looking in the Southwest U.S., these are places where it's a lot drier. They're going to have less access to water. So there's physical water scarcity. Even if if we look in the U.S. Southwest, you have a city like Las Vegas where there's fountains and water's all over the place all the time. Kind of this contradiction where economics can overcome that physical water scarcity, but at what cost? So this map here is showing the share of population with access to clean drinking water. And this map more readily aligns with our developed versus developing countries divide. You'll see most developed and newly industrialized countries, the vast majority of their population have access to clean drinking water, whereas it tends to be the poorest of countries that have little access to water. But this is a problem which over time is getting better. Another issue is water stresses. So this includes things that stress one's access to water. Again, we have inadequate access to clean drinking water for over 1.2 billion people, and this can be due to a variety of reasons. One is the lack of sanitation. In many areas around the world, without running water, they don't have access to toilets. So there's access to clean drinking water is impeded by this. Their water is contaminated and diseases spread really quickly. There's an overuse of groundwater, which can reduce agricultural yields in a region. The overuse and pollution of water. And there's also regional conflicts over water, which some have argued might be a future driver of conflict in the future. And we have seen conflicts like this in the past. Some have pointed to the conflict in Sudan as an example of this, where water and access to water helped lead to conflict. And as a result, we see water shortages popping up as a developing issue. So just a couple examples of this. So in China, we've seen rapid industrialization and urbanization. China's made a very concerted effort to urbanize their country. And in some cases, this is happening quicker than they can actually build the access to water. So there's an overuse of water. They're diverting water, diverting river basins to make room for cities. They can build cities in places where rivers and lakes used to be, diverting water for hydroelectric projects. As a result of this, we're seeing water shortages in the area. So it's estimated that about 100 million people in China don't have access to clean water, and 460 million lack proper sanitation. Even a little closer to home, though, we see water shortages. In California, for example, in the U.S. Southwest, they have been experiencing a drought for the last several summers. And in many of these places, because they don't have access to easy sources, they've been relying on groundwater pumping for many years. And this is a non-renewable resource. Once you pump the water, it's not going to replenish itself for a long time. And as a result, residents are being forced to drain pools, dig up their lawns, and replace them with stones or artificial turf because they can't afford, they don't have the water resources to maintain these things. So in summary, in today's lesson you learned that even though 70% of the earth is covered by water, only about 1% is drinkable fresh water. Canada has lots of fresh water, and Canadians in turn use lots of water. And problems such as overfishing, pollution, water loss, and water shortages are taking their toll on the world's water supply.